My ex-wife and her sibling terminated me the day they took over the firm. They did expect what came next. It started, I think, with the way she stopped laughing at my jokes. I used to make her laugh, like really laugh, the kind of laugh that folds a person over, the kind that escapes before they realize they're doing it. That laugh lived in our house for years. It would echo from the kitchen on a Sunday morning or hum through the sheets after a long day. I was proud of that sound. It meant we were still okay. But then, somewhere between the fourth fundraising round and her mother's second stroke, it vanished. She didn't stop smiling altogether. Catherine was too polished for that. But the warmth behind it faded like the last sliver of sun before dusk. She started giving me those thin, closed-lip smiles that said, "I see you, but I'm not here with you." And it's not like we were perfect before. God, no, we fought like any married couple does. Schedules, stress, how we drift apart for weeks at a time and then come back like nothing happened. But there was always this tether between us, invisible but taut, like some shared mythology we believed in even when everything else felt like a lie. The office was just an extension of that mythology. We co-founded the firm 7 years ago, me with the ideas, her with the execution. She was the closer, I was the opener. I'd pitch like hell and she'd seal the deal with that exacting brilliance of hers, that quiet way she had of making people feel seen and subtly indebted at the same time. It was intoxicating to watch. We built something real, something people respected. We used to go out for drinks after big pitches. God, I remember one time we had just landed this massive client, and she was in heels she couldn't walk in because she was still trying to convince herself she liked fashion. We stumbled into this hole-in-the-wall jazz bar around midnight, half drunk and high off the wind, and she pulled me into the back booth and said, "You know, I don't think I'd survive this world without you." She said it without blinking, like it was the most obvious truth. I held onto that moment longer than I should have. But people change, or maybe they reveal who they've been all along and you just weren't ready to see it. Either way, the distance between us became geography, tangible, maps of silence and unspoken accusations spread between our desks. She stopped looping me in on strategy calls, stopped asking what I thought about new hires. I chalked it up to stress. I told myself it was a phase, that she was overwhelmed, that maybe I wasn't being present enough. I didn't want to entertain the idea that she had already chosen a life that no longer included me. And then Milo showed up. Her brother, half-brother technically, but they were close. Too close sometimes. He'd been a C-list venture capitalist before we brought him on, all slick charm and just enough buzzwords to keep the board interested. I never liked him. He reminded me of the kids in prep school who paid other kids to do their homework and then bragged about their grades. But Catherine insisted, said we needed someone with political fluency and family trust. I agreed reluctantly. That's the thing about marriage and business. Too many compromises start to feel like loyalty. At first he played nice, took me out to lunch, talked about his vision for the firm, said all the right things. But there was always this glint in his eye, like he was waiting for me to slip. When I wasn't looking, he built alliances. Took drinks with the junior partners, charmed the clients, made suggestions that sounded harmless but subtly undercut me. Death by paper cuts. And Catherine didn't defend me. That was the real betrayal, I think. Not the actual act, not even the vote. It was the long, slow realization that she was standing on the other side of a line I didn't know had been drawn. I remember the morning it happened. A Tuesday. I'd been out late the night before prepping a pitch deck. They never even let me present. I showed up early, still wired from too much coffee and too little sleep. The boardroom was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and stays there. Milo was already seated, flipping through a folder like he owned the place. Catherine stood by the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I walked in and felt it immediately, the hush, the static in the air. Everyone avoided my eyes. "David," Milo said too cheerfully, "glad you could join us." There was a moment, maybe a few seconds, where I thought this was just another power play, a stunt, but then Catherine handed me the envelope. It was cream-colored, thick, like it had been printed on expensive paper. My name on the front, her handwriting. My hands went numb. "What is this?" I asked. I don't remember my voice. I think I was still trying to make it sound normal. "We've voted," she said, just that, like it was a formality. Like I hadn't helped build this company from a sketchpad and a shared Google Doc on our honeymoon. "You voted." "We're restructuring," Milo chimed in, "and unfortunately that means we have to let you go." Let me go, as if I were a burden they'd been carrying, as if I hadn't sacrificed years, friendships, pieces of my soul to make this thing real. I looked at her then, really looked. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her fingers were clenched around her wrist the way they always did when she was nervous, but she didn't say anything else. I could have exploded, said something cruel, burned it all down right there, but instead I just nodded, took the envelope, walked out without a word. HR followed me to my office like some specter of bureaucracy, watching as I packed a box with too many memories and not enough dignity. A photo of us at the first company retreat, the mug that said CEO-ish. A notepad filled with half-formed ideas I thought we'd explore together. The elevator ride down was the longest of my life. I pressed the button, and the doors closed with a soft click that sounded like a final period at the end of a sentence I didn't write. Outside, the sky was a mocking blue. The city didn't pause. No one noticed the man standing on the sidewalk holding a cardboard box and trying not to crumble. She didn't text, didn't call, not that day, not the next. I went home, took off my shoes, sat on the couch, and just stared. I wasn't angry yet, that came later. At first, there was just silence. A thick, endless silence that stretched across my chest like plastic wrap. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just kept hearing her voice in that room, calm, composed, rehearsed. "We voted." And just like that, I became a ghost in my own life. The first morning after, I didn't get out of bed. I didn't need to. No alarms, no back-to-back calls, no black coffee waiting for me in the kitchen, half cold already from her early start, no buzz of Slack messages, no one needing my input, no one needing me. It was like the world had turned its face away, politely, quietly, but completely. The apartment felt too large. Not physically, it was a modest space, minimalist and full of deliberate choices, but the kind of large that feels hollow. The silence had a weight to it, thick and velvety, like being underwater. I stared at the ceiling so long I began to memorize the imperfections in the paint, tiny cracks, faint discolorations. It reminded me of our bedroom in the early days, when we first moved in, before the success, before the chaos. Back when everything felt like potential instead of pressure. I didn't eat, I barely drank. My body didn't even ask for anything. It just sort of shut down, like it understood instinctively that the operating system had crashed. My phone rang a few times. Texts trickled in from old colleagues, people who probably liked me more than they liked her or him. I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say? Hey, yeah, it turns out trusting the woman you married with your heart and your company was a bad idea. Thanks for checking in. The fourth day, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. Unshaven, eyes swollen and sunken like I hadn't slept in years. I touched my face and it felt like someone else's skin. I laughed, this bitter, cracked thing that came out of nowhere. I laughed until I choked on it, until I was sitting on the bathroom floor in boxers, sobbing like a child and shaking from something I couldn't name. That was the first time I said it out loud. She left me. It sounded ridiculous, even in my own voice. Because she didn't leave in the way you expect someone to leave. She didn't pack a suitcase or slam the door. She removed me surgically like a tumor. No mess, just clean margins. By the second week, I'd started walking. I don't know what pulled me out of bed that day. Maybe the sun filtering in through the blinds, too bright to ignore. Maybe the smell of my own sweat. Maybe just inertia, the kind that says if you lie here any longer, you will disappear. So I walked at first just around the block, then a few blocks, then all the way downtown. My legs moved faster than my brain could catch up with. I didn't think, I just escaped. From the apartment, from the memories, from the overwhelming, inescapable nothing. It was on one of those walks that I stumbled into the bookstore. It was small, the kind of place that feels like someone's living room. Wooden shelves sagging under the weight of too many forgotten titles. A cat, real or imagined, I still can't tell you, stretched out on the windowsill. I didn't go in that first time. I just stood at the glass, staring in like it was a museum display of someone else's calm life. The sign caught my eye, Friday night open mic. Someone had scribbled the words on a warped piece of cardstock, a bit crooked, a bit charming. I took a photo of it, don't know why. Friday came and I was still thinking about that sign, so I went. Not because I thought I belonged there, but because I didn't belong anywhere else. The room was dim, warm, smelled like old paper and cinnamon. There were maybe 15 people scattered in folding chairs and couches. No one looked up when I walked in, and I liked that. I sat near the back where the shadows were thicker and I could pretend I wasn't watching. The first reader was a girl who couldn't have been older than 19, hair dyed a color that didn't exist in nature, reading a piece about her mother's death. Her voice trembled, but the words didn't. The room was silent but not empty. It was holding her. That's what it felt like, this collective pause, everyone letting her be exactly as broken or whole as she was in that moment. After her, a man in flannel sang a song about his divorce. Off-key but honest. It hit me harder than I wanted it to. There was a line, "You turned my love into a ledger," and I had to look down at my shoes just to keep from falling apart. I stayed until the last reader, a poem about coffee and loneliness and growing older in a city that never stops talking. When it ended, there was this tiny ripple of applause, soft, reverent, almost like a prayer. I didn't talk to anyone, I just left. Walked home in the cold with my hands jammed in my pockets and a strange throb in my chest. Not pain exactly, something quieter, a pulse. The next week I went back, sat in the same spot, stayed longer, listened harder. And then one day I found myself telling the owner, Jesse, tall, soft-spoken, always with a pen behind his ear, that I used to write, used to being the keyword, back before the company, before life got practical. He looked at me for a moment like he was deciding whether to believe me. Then he handed me a coffee, black, no sugar, no cream, and said, "Well, maybe it's time you start again." I laughed it off, but I came back the next day anyway. Mid-afternoon, no one else there, just Jesse behind the counter, typing something into an ancient laptop. I sat at the far table, took out a notebook I'd found under the bed, and started to write. At first, it was nonsense, half-thoughts, angry sentences, scribbles that turned into spirals, but it was something. My hand remembered how to move across the page. My mind remembered how to feel without trying to organize it into bullet points or pitch slides. I wrote about Catherine, about her mouth and her eyes and the silence that had taken up residence between us like a third person in the bed. I wrote about the boardroom, about the envelope, about Milo's smirk. I wrote until my hand cramped and the page was smudged with sweat and coffee rings. Jesse never asked what I was working on, just kept the coffee warm, the lights low, and the music soft. Sometimes he'd nod toward the shelves and say, "Found poetry in aisle 2, or "There's a short story hiding behind the cookbooks." I appreciated the absurdity. It felt like a shared joke between survivors. And that's what it felt like, slowly surviving, not living yet, not healing, but surviving. Some days were harder than others. The grief came in waves, unexpected and brutal. A woman in the park wearing Catherine's favorite scarf, an email from a vendor I forgot to update, the echo of her voice when I passed the conference room in my head. But the writing helped. It gave shape to the ache, and the bookstore became my anchor, quiet, consistent, completely uninvested in who I used to be. For the first time in months, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. Just unwritten. The call came on a Sunday. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I hadn't heard his voice in months. It sounded smaller, less certain, like something had been peeled away from it, ego maybe, or just the armor people like Milo wear when the world is watching. "David," he said, and the silence that followed told me more than the name did. "What?" He cleared his throat. "It's about Catherine." I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the notebooks I'd been filling like a man obsessed. Half of them unreadable, all of them necessary. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I didn't care. "She's sick," Milo said. "It's cancer." The words didn't land all at once. They floated like snow until one by one they began to settle on my chest. "What kind?" I asked, because that's what people ask. It felt mechanical, almost performative, like I was playing the role of someone who still knew how to feel. "Breast cancer, stage 4, it spread." A long pause. She didn't want anyone to know. She thought she could just keep going, keep working. She thought if she pushed through, it would go away, or she could at least control it. I could hear it then, the guilt. Milo's voice cracked just slightly, like a split in old vinyl. "She's asking for you." I hung up. Not out of rage, not even out of shock, just self-preservation. I couldn't absorb it, not right then, not in the quiet of my apartment where grief could sneak up and slit my throat without warning. But later that night, I sat on the floor and stared at a photo of us taken in the early days when we were stupid and fearless. We were in the back of a cab, holding hands, laughing so hard it blurred the image. It didn't feel like someone else's life yet. It still felt mine enough to hurt. So I went. The hospital was north of the city, in one of those sterile buildings that smelled like sanitizer and resignation. I walked through the halls like I was underwater, the air thick with fluorescent light and the sound of slow beeping machines. Room 432. She looked not like herself. Her hair was gone, wrapped in a soft navy scarf, her face thinner, eyes sunken but still sharp. She was reading something, a legal doc probably, of course she was. She didn't notice me at first. I stood in the doorway, hands in my coat pockets, watching the woman who had once shared my toothbrush, my ambition, my life. And now she looked like a stranger made out of all the pieces I'd tried not to remember. "Catherine." Her head turned slowly, and for a moment she blinked like she didn't believe I was real. "David," she said, and her voice was dry, soft, like paper rubbed thin. We didn't hug, we didn't smile. There was too much between us for either. I didn't know if you'd come. You didn't exactly make it easy, I said, and my voice came out flatter than I intended. She nodded. I deserved that. Another long silence. We were always good at silences, her and I, but this one was different. It wasn't tense. It wasn't pregnant with things unsaid. It was tired. It was honest. How long have you known? I asked, sitting in the chair beside her bed. 7 months. I did the math in my head. That meant she knew when they fired me. She knew, and still, she handed me the envelope like it was just business. Jesus, Catherine. I thought if I could get ahead of it, if I could cut the weakness out before it spread. She stopped herself, laughed bitter and dry. Ironic, right? I looked at her then, really looked, the bones in her wrists, the fine lines around her mouth. She looked like someone who had run out of war to wage. I didn't want you to see me like this, she said. You didn't want me to see you at all. She turned her head away. I thought if I pushed you out, it would hurt less when I died. And there it was, the confession. Not a grand apology, not some redemptive monologue, just the rawest piece of her I'd heard in years. I didn't say anything. Because what is there to say when the person who destroyed you also wants your forgiveness before she dies? I stared at her hands, pale, veiny, the nails still painted in that understated shade she loved, ballet slipper or something like that. My heart cracked open in a way I didn't know it still could. I hated you, I said, for what you did, for how you made me feel like I was disposable, like none of us mattered. She nodded slowly. She didn't cry. I know. I don't know if I can forgive you. She closed her eyes. You don't have to. I just wanted you to know that I didn't stop loving you, not really. I just stopped knowing how to love anyone. I sat there for a long time. We didn't speak much after that. We just shared the air, the sterile quiet of that dim hospital room, the soft hum of the IV pump beside her. At one point her hand moved slightly toward mine and I took it, not as a lover, not even as a friend, but as someone who had once been her home. And for those last few minutes, we weren't the people who built and broke a company, who turned a marriage into a battlefield. We were just David and Catherine, two tired, flawed people sitting on the edge of goodbye. I left without making promises. She died 2 weeks later. I didn't go to the funeral. Milo sent a short, emotionless message. She asked that you have her watch. It's in the mail. I never opened the box. But that night I walked into the bookstore. Jessie was there, as always, rearranging shelves like the universe depended on alphabetization. You okay? He asked. No, I said, honest for the first time in a while, but I'm here. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just poured me a coffee, pointed toward the empty chair in the back. That night I read something aloud for the first time, a story I wrote about a man who loses everything and finds himself in the stillness. My voice cracked halfway through, but I didn't stop. And when it was over, the room was silent again, that kind of silence that holds space, that makes you feel, maybe for the first time in ages, like you still belong to something. Like you can begin again. There's no script for what comes after. After the betrayal, after the hospital, after the moment you sit across from someone you once promised forever to and realize there are no neat resolutions, no sharp-edged revenge, no justice that makes the story feel finished. There's just life still humming, still unfolding. Some mornings I still wake up expecting to hear her in the kitchen, that soft rustle of her slippers, the clicking of the stovetop kettle. Muscle memory is stubborn, that way your body remembers things long after your heart lets go. But it fades slowly, imperceptibly. I moved out of the apartment a few months after she passed. The lease was up, and staying there felt like trying to wear someone else's skin. Too tight in the wrong places, too loose in others. I packed what I needed, my notebooks, a couple of worn sweaters, the espresso machine I'd finally learned to use without her instructions, and left everything else behind. Milo never called again, and I never reached out. The new place is small. Bare walls, wide windows, one bedroom, just enough space for a desk and a chair, and a plant I'm actively trying not to kill. It's nothing like our old place. There's no marble countertop, no sleek furniture curated from designer catalogs, but the silence here feels different, less hollow, less haunted. I write every morning now, not always well, not always with purpose. But I sit at the desk by the window with my coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and I fill pages. Some days it's fiction, other days it's her. Some version of her anyway. A woman made of smoke and teeth, a voice that lives in walls, a ghost who once held my hand. The bookstore become more than a sanctuary, it's a rhythm. Jesse asked me to host the Friday night readings a few weeks after I read my first piece. I said no at first. I didn't think I had the steadiness for it, but he just shrugged and said, "No one here's steady, that's kind of the point." So now I light the candles, arrange the chairs, greet the poets and the stammering songwriters. I pour cheap wine into mismatched mugs and tell people they're brave, even when they don't believe it yet. We're a strange little tribe. A woman in her 60s who only writes about birds. A quiet guy named Theo who reads poems like he's afraid they'll bite him back. A college student who writes stories about aliens that feel suspiciously like metaphors for grief. We're all carrying something, but no one pretends to be whole. That's the rule. No masks, no polish, just pages and breath and the occasional silence that says, "I see you." One night, Jesse gave me a key. "In case I'm not here," he said. I asked if he was planning on disappearing. He just smiled. "Aren't we all?" I don't know what to do with that key. Sometimes I carry it in my pocket just to remind myself that someone trusted me with something, that I belong, even in small ways. I still think about Catherine, less now, but when I do, it's softer, like pressing on a bruise that's faded but hasn't quite left. I remember her handwriting on sticky notes, the way she used to hum when she was focused. I remember how sharp she could be, how cruel when cornered, how frightened behind all that brilliance. She wasn't a villain, and I'm not a hero. We were two people trying to outrun our own shadows and ending up trampling each other instead. Sometimes I wonder if she ever really loved me, or if she just needed me to believe in her enough to believe in herself. But love is never that clean, is it? It's part hunger, part shelter, part illusion. I still haven't opened the box with her watch. It's in the back of the closet, tucked behind some old manuscript drafts and a sweater I keep meaning to donate. I'm not sure why I'm keeping it. Maybe because opening it would make her death more real. Or maybe because leaving it sealed lets some part of me pretend there's still something unfinished between us. A question I haven't asked, an answer she never gave. But I don't need closure anymore. I used to think I did, used to chase it like a dog chasing headlights. But now I think most wounds don't close clean. They scar, they itch sometimes, but you live. You build new things, slowly, quietly. Last week I planted basil on my windowsill. It's already wilting. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm trying. and that feels like something. That feels like enough. The writing is better now, not polished, not perfect, but honest. I've submitted a few pieces to lit mags. One got accepted. Jesse taped the letter to the front counter and told every customer who walked in that one of us made it. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. This isn't a comeback story. I didn't get rich, I didn't get revenge, I didn't build a better firm or write a best-selling memoir about how I turned pain into profit. All I did was survive, and then I stayed alive long enough to begin again. And now here I am. The sun comes through the window in the morning, the kettle whistles, the basil tries its best. I write, I read, I drink too much coffee. I make space for people to tell their truths even when their voices shake. And sometimes when the night is quiet and I can hear the city breathing through the glass, I close my eyes and whisper, "You didn't destroy me." Not because I need her to hear it, but because I finally believe it. And that's enough.